Welcome to the Publish Her podcast, a place where you can come to get inspiration, motivation, help, encouragement, and support in your journey to write, publish, and sell your book. Hosted by Alexa Bigwharf.
'Cause I've been where you've been, and I felt what you're feeling, and I don't want to get in your way.
Welcome back to another just amazing episode of the Publish Her podcast. I'm Alexa Bigwharf, your host, and today we are talking about a really fun topic. Well, maybe not so fun if you're in the midst of trying to create yours, but we're going to dig into talking about your book, Blurb. This is not something I've ever talked about on the podcast, so I'm very excited to bring in a new topic for you. And it's also it's such a critical and crucial part of your book marketing and especially your sales pages. But I do have an expert to tell us all about it today. So we have Jessie Cunniffe. She's a professional blurb writer and book blurb coach from Sydney, Australia. So we'll have a lovely accent to go along with this. She is a passionate advocate of the indie author community, and she's dedicated herself to taking the pain out of blurb writing with her custom blurb writing and critique services and 2 signature courses, Book Blurb Magic and the Spicy Blurb Playbook. That sounds fun. When she's not writing or dreaming up her next BBM product, Jessie can be found in high school classrooms with a guitar in hand, and she's been a regular contributor to the arts pages of one of Australia's most highly respected newspapers for the past decade. On the occasion that she manages to snatch some reading time, she's probably buried in P.G. Wodehouse or Agatha Christie. Sorry about that little catch there. Well, thank you so much, Jessie. We are thrilled to have you come and demystify the blurb for us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's my favorite thing to talk about. And as you said, it's something that's actually not talked about enough. And it is a really critical part of the book marketing process and one that can make such a difference to your sales and reader engagement. And it also makes content creation on social media a lot easier as well. There's lots of things you can do with the blurb.
Yes, well, I agree. And I'm excited to talk about all these things. Let's first start off with, especially for our newer audience who may be just learning about writing a book, what is a blurb and then I guess I'll ask that next question afterwards. What is a blurb?
That is a great question. And the funny thing is that's actually changed over time. So a blurb once upon a time, and you actually still get like old school editors referring to this blurbs in this way. So it's a good thing to know. But a blurb originally was actually like the little endorsement quote that you would get from, your favorite author to put on the front or sometimes back of your book cover to show that your book was worth reading. So a blurb originally was that little praise quote that, this is the best thing I've ever read, or I couldn't put it down. These days, blurb is much more commonly used, almost exclusively used for your back cover description. So they're kind of one and the same. So I'm going to use blurb and back cover description interchangeably through this. And it's also the same thing as the book description that you put on Amazon. So whatever goes on your back cover goes on Amazon. There's a few slight differences, which we can talk about a little later. But essentially all of that is the blurb. So it's just good to sort of know that distinction first up, because if you do, I bought a book recently, it's by quite an experienced editor, and he was referring to blurbs in the old traditional sense, but these days it's pretty much just exclusively referring to your back cover copy.
I think that's true for indie published books for sure, which is where we're focusing today and where you publish. They do still commonly use it in the traditional world. I cannot speak today, referring to a blurb by the same thing that it's. But I think you're absolutely right. Just like so many other words in the English language that can have multiple meanings, you can have it as a quote or as your description. And today we are referring to description, and that's where we're going. So just to clarify that for anybody, because I know somebody will be like, I still call them blurbs on my book. And
yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about this. You mentioned that it's going to be your back cover description and the description that you're using on Amazon and some other places like that. So you mentioned that there would be some slight differences in those two places. So let's talk about that piece. How does your back cover for the actual cover differ from the sales page?
So the biggest difference is what we call the CTA, or the call to action. So on Amazon, because people are scrolling through, you need to keep them on the page. You need to actually give them a clear directive to go to that buy now or read now button. And it seems really self-explanatory, but I always kind of give the example of my apartment block has a really obvious number on the front of it. And I cannot tell you how many times people have stopped me right in front of that number to say, hey, is this apartment block number 22?
You're like,
I'm not going to give you my actual one, but
point.
and it's right behind me. And I know that I sent an email to my list about this recently, and someone came back and was like, this is such a great metaphor, because I always feel bad telling people, hey, go click buy now, because it feels like it should be obvious. But in actual fact, when you're kind of in that scroll mode, ideally what happens is people read your hook, they read the whole blurb in its entirety, they're scrolling all the way down, and then usually they need to scroll back up to click whatever button it is to buy now, read now if they have Kindle Unlimited, etc. So on all my Amazon blurbs, I always put a call to action, which is very, very specific. And I usually personalize it to the book as well. So let's say if it's the romance, it might be like, scroll up and click buy now to meet Scott and Judy today. Something that kind of draws them into your book, or, start the such and such series. But I actually give them a very, very direct instruction as to exactly where to go. And I know that a lot of authors feel uncomfortable with that at the start, but it's so crucial to making sure your audience actually takes action after reading that blurb, that they don't read it, go, that sounds like a great story, and then leave it in the dust. On your actual physical back cover, obviously you're not going to have something that says scroll up and click buy now. Some authors do still put call to actions, and I don't think it's a bad thing, to be like, start the such and such series today, for example. That's just a good one, just to kind of propel them into action if they're actually holding the book in their hands. But that is the crucial difference, I think, between your Amazon or any online book distributor copy and the one that actually goes in your physical book.
I really like that idea of having a very specific call to action on those sales pages. Scroll up and meet Keith and Sarah or whatever it was. I think that's so, yep. I've never heard that suggestion before. And I think that's really fantastic, because sometimes writing a call to action, you can feel like you don't really know what to say. To buy the book now just doesn't feel like, but I like that scroll. Yeah. I love that. I love that. Sorry, I repeated it like 3 times there. All right. So let's talk about why these are so difficult to write. It's so funny. Like we always, we hear this so often in our community. Like, I just wrote an 80,000 page book. For some people it's hard, some people it comes easily. And for the life of me, I cannot write a 250 word or 300 word description for my back cover and my Amazon page. Why is it so hard?
Lots of reasons, but one main one, which is that very few authors, and this is not at all a judgment in any way, because the information just isn't clearly out there. Many authors don't actually understand the structure of a book blurb, and how can you put together a jigsaw puzzle if you don't actually know what pieces you're playing with? It basically becomes this minefield of trying to go through your whole book and pick favorites, go, oh, this plot point should be in there and this plot point shouldn't, or this character should be in there and this character shouldn't. And when we are approaching blurbs with the plot at the forefront of our minds, basically trying to condense our plot, it usually turns out very, very badly, because the kind of secret of blurbs, which shouldn't be a secret, and this is why I'm talking to people like you, is that plot does not, in fact, drive your book blurb. It actually takes up a lot of space. It'll probably cause a lot of tears, and it doesn't actually sell your book. You can compare the plot of Star Wars to Harry Potter, and they're like almost identical in terms of the tropes and character arcs that we get in there. The plot is not what sold either of those 2 series. It's actually the very specific characters and the very specific emotions and circumstances that those characters are experiencing. So the actual driving force of your blurb will be the emotion, what makes your characters unique, but also how they are reacting to the circumstances that they are in. Luke Skywalker and Harry Potter didn't react in the exact same way to their circumstances. They're very different characters. They are actually what is selling the book. And we are, of course, talking predominantly fiction. I also teach how to write nonfiction blurbs as well. And for your nonfiction listeners, nonfiction blurbs, the driving force for a lot of books. And when I say nonfiction, I don't mean creative nonfiction. I'm talking like, self-help books, instructional guides, all that kind of thing. The driving force will be the transformation that you're selling. So it's not just what you know, but it's actually what you can offer to your readers. Like, what they're going to read this book and they're going to lose 5 kilos, or they're going to quit smoking, whatever the transformation is. And that is what you were selling. But I think that's the key driver. A lot of authors just look at the plot or the content of their book and try to squish. And in actual fact, you need to cut to the core of your book first and work outwards from that. And once we kind of shift our mindset, that usually makes things a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah. And you're going to need to describe a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Absolutely. So if we go back to fiction blurbs, I always try to find the essence, the key message of the book, and actually frame the entire blurb around that. So for, your opening paragraph, that might look like setting up what your character's greatest challenge in life is. And spoiler alert, that's not going to be the actual climax of your book. It's what theme has followed your character around their whole entire life. Have they always desired control? Have they always desired control but never got it? Have they always been poor? Have they always strived to tell the truth and failed miserably? What is their, I suppose it's often their kind of critical character flaw. Sometimes it's just what life deals out to them. But starting with that actually allows your readers to go on a mini journey in your blurb and start to see what might change or what might shift or how life might challenge your character over the course of your story. And that is so much more important than, they, lived in this city and then they moved to this city and then they went to this school. All of those kinds of details actually fail to provide the correct kind of narrative. So think of your blurb as a separate narrative from your book's narrative. Your book has a beginning, middle, and end that is going to be different for the beginning, middle, and end of your book blurb, because obviously you can't give spoilers away. And what most authors will do, because like I say, most of us just don't know any better, because if you go and Google how to write a book blurb, the advice out there is a minefield of things that you probably shouldn't be doing. But what most authors will do is they will write their book blurb like a synopsis or a summary that stops where the spoilers start. Okay. And all that does is leaves our readers in the lurch rather than wanting more. So you actually need to find a narrative arc within your blurb that is satisfying. And there is, of course, a formula and a standard way to do this, which is something that I explain in my course, but also in my free cheat sheet. If you go to anatomyofabookblurb.com, I've got a free cheat sheet that actually walks you through each piece of the puzzle so that you can actually see what should be going into your blurb. And that starts to give you the parameters to work within so that this all sounds a heck of a lot less confusing, because confusion is a primary, I think, experience that a lot of authors feel when they sit down to write their book blurb. So did you want me to walk you quickly through the pieces of the puzzle?
Yes, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so this is very similar for fiction and for nonfiction blurbs, and I'll explain where they differ. But if we start with a fiction structure, now most book blurbs are written in third-person POV. I have a whole bunch of stuff on my Instagram about first-person POV blurbs. There's always a big debate about it. But if you're just starting out and if you're unsure, third-person is a great place to start. That's what all the traditional publishers use. And it's also much easier to convey your story in third person. First person has a whole lot of complications. So what you're going to want to do is start with a hook. So this is usually a single sentence or two sentences, sometimes three very, very, very short statements, like 3 or 4 words each. Basically a really punchy statement that captures the crux of your book, the main conflict. Sometimes I tell authors to use a really tense quote from the middle of their book that kind of has people wanting to go, well, what happens next? But essentially the hook should be something that its job is not to convey necessary information. Theoretically, the readers should be able to skip right past the hook and get straight to the blurb and not have missed out on anything, because sometimes the way book covers are formatted, that's what happens. Sometimes we skip things. But assuming that readers' eyes go straight to the top of your back cover or straight to the top of your book description, that is the thing that you want to put up there to draw them in really compellingly. And on Amazon, often it's the only part of the book description they can see, and they've got to click read more to see the rest of your blurb. So that's kind of, I probably spend 70% of my time when I write a blurb making sure the hook is right. And again, like that's something that there are formulas for and whatnot as well. And then we jump into mostly a 3-paragraph structure for a standard fiction blurb. First paragraph is your setup. Second paragraph develops I'm not going to say the plot because that's not quite right. It's developing the characters and developing the conflict. And the third paragraph raises the stakes. The third paragraph is where, we really have to make it clear to readers what the character stands to lose and or gain, so that they want to read the book. This is the part of the blurb that a lot of authors kind of skimp out on, because it can feel difficult to know what's a spoiler and what isn't. And it can also feel weird making your book sound exciting because it's your book. And then you pop your call to action at the bottom. For nonfiction blurbs, pretty much the same structure, but I recommend instead of a second paragraph that you actually use some dot points to highlight the key concepts of your book. People looking for a nonfiction read are kind of more likely to skim through, and it can be a quicker way to sort of, and a more punchy way to sell the content in your book. But that's the very basic structure.
And dot points are those bullet points in
Yeah.
US English? Okay, just checking. I figure.
Of course, yes.
I figured.
I'm always learning more US English.
But then I was thinking, I don't want anybody to think that this is one of those like words that we use like plot points or something like that. Like, what's a dot point? But
that's a very good point. This is what I do love about being Australian, and most of my clients are American. Is that I'm just always learning new US English. It's great fun.
Well, for a minute, I was going to think that I had just learned a new whole concept of something that was written in a blurb, but there was a specific thing called a dot point. But that's
not that exciting, I'm afraid.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. So yes, yeah. Okay, moving right along here. So thank you for giving us that structure. So let's talk about how if you have any tips that you didn't just cover in that, on what are the tips to make like the best, strongest blurb. I feel like you covered a lot of it, but I don't know if there's something in terms of like word choice or anything like that that's, well, you're the expert. What do you think stands out as the top tips?
So my top tip would be learn proper book blurb structure. That's going to make sure that the momentum is correctly maintained through your blurb, for want of a better expression. And it's also going to cut down the time it takes you to figure out what should go into your blurb, because like I say, it sets up those parameters where you're like, oh, I need A piece, B piece, C piece, and we're done. The second thing I would say is that your book blurb should be under 200 words. I have occasionally, for big fantasy epics, gone as high as like 250 in my head is the upper limit. I hate reaching 250. I feel like that's a failure. I'd say 230. 230 is the ceiling. I think if you can't say it in 230 words, we've either got a very complex plot, and sometimes it is absolutely justified, and fantasy readers know what they're in for. They're more likely to read a longer blurb because they're looking for a 150,000 word book. But for most blurbs, and certainly if we're on the other end of the scale, romance, 150 to 200 words is the sweet spot. Less than 150, you're not really going to have enough time to connect with your reader. And more than 200, you're probably saying things that don't need to be said for the average book. Picture books and children's books, shorter again, 50 to 100 words, generally speaking. So word count's a super, super important thing, because we just want to give ourselves those limits and also acknowledge that our readers have those limits themselves. I don't know about you, but I rarely read a blurb in its entirety unless it's really, really good and the story connects with me. So you have very limited time to get your audience's attention. Don't assume they're going to hang around. And what would my third tip be? I suppose my third tip would be not to stick too rigidly to any rules. So like when I see things like, don't mention anything outside of the first 50 pages of your book, alarms start to go off, because that's just the first 50 pages of a novella is completely different to the first 50 pages of 100,000 word epic. Right. So really beware of any rules that say you should only have this many sentences in this paragraph. Do I kind of 8 to 9 times out of 10 stick to the same number of sentences in, say, my opening paragraph? Yeah, I do, because it works. But there are exceptions all of the time. And I do think that blurbs are an area, and I think because people are sort of looking for the magic bullet, a lot of people kind of give those rules or make up those rules, and they can be unnecessarily limiting, and they can actually sort of damage your blurb. So be wary of any blurb advice that says you absolutely must do this. Even if I say it, I can guarantee you I've broken it at least once or twice, because there's just going to be circumstances. It's great to know the rules so you can break them, but those kind of real arbitrary, very, very restrictive rules, not a fan. So you can happily steer clear of those.
Cool. I like having a tip being you don't have to do this. Don't follow.
That is my favorite kind of tip.
I know. Okay. Well, oh my goodness. I was just taking all of that in, because blurbs are something I think I find them a lot easier for nonfiction to write, because that transformation piece can easily be those dot points, bullet points, that are just like transformations. But I tell you what, in going through the the book, right? Helping authors with book blurbs and writing my own is probably my least favorite part of the entire process of writing, publishing, and selling a book, because it like you said, it's very difficult to find information out there about it. You can read a bunch of back blurbs, but it's like a lot of other things. You recognize that you're reading things that follow a formula, but you don't really know necessarily how to pull those things for yourself. So I really appreciate you breaking it all down. You've said some things that I had not heard before that I found very interesting. So I'm excited about that.
Awesome.
I wanted to make sure that we reiterated your anatomyofAblurb.com is where you said the free sheet is.
AnatomyofAbookblurb.com. That's also the link on my Instagram as well. So if you hop onto my Instagram, it's just at bookblurbmagic. The link in bio will take you straight to my freebie. All you have to give me is your email, and I don't spam people. I actually send out blurb tips 3 to 5 times a week, and you can unsubscribe if you're trying to get to inbox 0. So that is the best place to start, and it will cost you absolutely nothing. But I have put together a coupon code for this podcast. So if you are interested in purchasing any of my products or services, which you can browse at bookblurbmagic.com, super easy to remember. If you use the code Write Publish Sell, you'll get 10% off any of my courses and services. So if you're listening and you've got that code Write Publish Sell, then go ahead and use that and get yourself a little bit of a discount. I will say this, breakdown that we've kind of given you here is a real whirlwind, and
Yes.
there's a lot to cover in blurbs. And if you're keen to do the DIY route, I do have my self-paced course, Book Blurb Magic, which is easy to find on my site, and that does walk you through step by step. If you feel like you really want your hand held all of the way, or you want to kind of just have a look at the rules and be like, maybe I'll use them, maybe I won't. You can do either of those with that course. And I have had lots and lots of indie authors come out of that and send me their blurbs, and I've been like legitimately impressed. I wouldn't sell if it didn't work. My background is in teaching. So if I'm teaching something that's not working, I'm not going to sell it. I'm really, really proud of that course, and people really enjoy it. And it does demystify the process. And of course, I have lots of other options if you just want me to write your blurb for you and you've listened to this and gone, that sounds awful, I never want to write a blurb again, please do it for me. That's also hand. Fine. That's no judgment here.
No blurb for me, please.
Yes. So I think that's all the links.
Oh, that's great. Well, no, I can tell. I mean, that's kind of why I was a little quiet. Usually my listeners are probably like, oh my gosh, that's the least Alexa has ever said in a podcast interview, because I was just really processing what you were saying, but also thinking, okay, that makes sense, but I need you to teach me how. And we probably would have gone on for an hour and a half if we had dug into that. Plus, that's what your course is about, because you can tell me a concept, but then when I sit down, it's kind of like if my editor comes back and says, okay, you need to show this more instead of tell it. I'm like, how? Because
so. Book Blurb Magic will show you the how. I absolutely promised you that. That was my biggest thing. And I've had a lot of students come back and say, oh, I've tried so many courses, this one has no fluff, it cuts to the chase, and that's all I wanted to do. And it is only $37, so it's very affordable if you've spent a whole lot of money on blurb writers. And it does cover fiction and non-fiction blurbs.
Nice.
Spicy Blurb Playbook, which you mentioned in my bio, I will just say quickly, is kind of in a funny in between phase where I'm in the process of relaunching it. It will be on my website, on my Instagram and everything, but that is a blurb course specifically for romance authors, and we talk a lot about first person POV blurbs and things in there. If you buy Book Blurb Magic, there's a sneaky little link inside the course to upgrade to the current beta version of Spicy Blurb Playbook, so you can be in there, and when I update the course, you just get all the updates. So if you're after both, you can do that. If you want to wait around, just keep an eye on my Instagram for when the relaunch happens.
That sounds great. And all I can tell you is $37 will most likely be the best money you've ever spent in your life, because it really is challenging. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. I've spent a lot of time like pulling my hair out over trying to get descriptions correct for a book, because it is so, as I said in the very beginning of it, like it's so important. And as you alluded to multiple times, like you've got to catch their attention quickly. And once you have your attention, you want to keep their attention. And it's just so critical. So thank you for talking about this very important topic, for giving us some real insight into what a great blurb looks like, what it is, all those wonderful things. Lots of great information. We'll have all of your links, your links to your site, your links to your social website, all that kind of stuff, the courses, the coupon code, all of that will be in our show notes for everyone who's listening. So if you missed anything, Jessie speaks very quickly. So if you missed anything, But I kind of told her to. No, I'm just kidding. That was a lot of information, so don't worry. We'll have it in the show notes for you, so you don't miss anything. Finally, where's the one place? If you mentioned your Instagram, is that where you want your social growth to come from, or do you want to send people to your website?
Yeah. Instagram. I love Instagram. I hang out there a lot. I make a lot of reels. I answer DMs and chat to people about their Blurb problems. I really love interacting with authors on there. So do please come and follow me, and then like shoot me a DM and be like, I heard you on Alexa's podcast, so I know where you've come from, and I'll give you a follow back and we can have a chat.
That's so awesome. This was fantastic. I appreciate this very much. And I hope you have a lot of interest in your course after this, because I think I'm going to buy it, because this is one area where I always need improvement too. So thank you.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you so much. And yeah, if I can demystify blurbs for a few more authors, then that's my job done.
Awesome. Thanks.
You don't have to give me your heart. You don't have to give it away. You don't got
Thank you for joining us on the Publish Her podcast. We hope to see you back for the next episode. Great, huge thanks goes to Jasmine Commerce for the use of her song. You can find Jasmine on SoundCloud. Go check out all of her music. We'll see you next time.